Father is certainly enjoying his supper. You just never took time before to find how good food can taste. We're off to a good start this morning, but will it last? Will you remember to eat the right way?
Education is elevation. I started off this little idea about junk food because I saw some memes about how our food was being banned in other countries. But I ain't want to just be no lazy penny pinching, content creator where I just take me a screenshot or something and just say the information. I want to do a little digging. My motto is research over me search. And when I found about the big food industry is that it's a lot like Big Pharma industry. You know what I'm saying? It's like a whole bunch of drug dealers. You know what I mean?
These are the drug dealers.
I know when you start mixing in substances to make a product and then push it, that's kind of like drug dealing, you feel me? On my mama, y'all, it's real out here. The food industry, I'm talking about like the big pharma industry, got a lot of influence politically, socially, economically on the reality here in America, you know what I'm saying? I'm talking about the intersections of emotional eating, the intersections of American imperialism, yes, American imperialism, the intersections of being able to have lobbyists, bureaucracies, and interest groups to push legislation that comes at the expense of Americans' health to make it where big corporations able to get profits. I came across this video where they were talking about how the pistachio industry, roll a video.
In the 1980s, one of the main industries that pushed for sanctions on Iran was the pistachio lobby, especially Stuart and Lydia Resnick, owners of the Wonderful Company, because they knew Iranian pistachios were far superior and would outcompete them.
With that being said, man, this video is going to be getting into the intersections of how the big food industry intersects with politics, intersecting with racism, intersecting with body positivity, intersecting with how different communities get seen as exposable and disposable, especially for white supremacy to make some of that money. Growing up, I knew a couple of things about when someone mixes in substances to make a product and then push it in the streets. The government call it drug dealing particularly, you know what I'm saying? But something about with these corporations, how they're able to mix food coloring to trick, you feel me, the consumers and thinking their products is fresh, how that has led to like horrible health things in this country. We're gonna make talking about food, junk food, the food industry with a little conscience. Jump right into it. The movement of food across oceans and between cultures reveals the history of human existence. Foods and cooking styles have been traded, adapted, and perfected by cooks across the globe, transforming ingredients into regional cuisine specific to particular cultures, ethnicities, and geographies. And yet, the story of appropriation of food and cuisine is not always one of ingenuity and celebration, but rather one of repression, exploitation, and theft in many instances. This appropriation can be understood as an exploitative practice rather than one borrowing. Even and oft celebrated food fusions from around the globe are often a result of centuries of white imperialism, such as the French influence in Vietnamese food and Spanish flavors that show up in the Filipino cuisine. This confluence of food and colonialism has roots in exploitative and appropriative actions based on both the historic and current oppression of non-white people. In illustrating historical context around the American food system, we have to go to the major event of when food corporations or when food industries, when food manufacturers started adding color into their food. Beginning in the late 19th century, for y'all that don't know, you know what I'm saying, that's like 1800. Food manufacturers devoted enormous resources to determine and create the right color of food, which many consumers would recognize and in time take for granted. Colors was easier to control, reproduce, and commoditize than other sensory factors. The smells of food, for instance, was difficult to convey in print or other media. In contrast, color served as a powerful communication tool. Food manufacturers began using color as a sign of consistent quality that would be visually appealing to consumers and market transaction. This idea behind creating a veil or deceiving consumers based off of marketing, you're gonna see is gonna be a overall theme throughout this video, especially when it comes to regulating what the food industry can do, and especially when it comes to recognizing the profits they was able to make. You know what I'm saying? One thing I know about being from the hood, I know a finesse when I see a finesse. And when you start learning about the food industry, especially how they've been able to monopolize politics in many different ways, you recognize that shit, that's what it is. You know, standardized color became a key component in the rise of mass production and mass marketing in the food industry. As somebody that was born in 1990, when we recognize how big the junk food industry had and how much marketing they spent on selling it, you know what I'm saying, to kids, we recognize that the mass production of food is something that is celebrated within Western culture because it shows how the industrialization and advancement of Western culture is so good. But on the flip side, the way that we have so many health problems and cancer and obesity and things like that comes from a lot of these big major industrial manufacturers not having to give a damn about the health of the consumers and mainly trying to figure out ways to step on the work. You know what I'm saying? In the hood, the concept of stepping on the work is like, hey, your shit was pure, but because you trying to make it where you can stretch the work out and sell it to multiple people, now you've watered it down. As a result, we see that same type of analogy happens in American food industry because you will see that instead of selling your ass real ice cream, they'll figure out a whole bunch of different additives and different chemicals to sell you some ice cream because it is much cheaper than giving you the actual product in itself. The expansion of standardized coloring took within a broader context well known to business historians. In the 1870s and 1880s, the development of transportation and communication infrastructure, the rise of managerial business enterprise, and innovations in manufacturing machinery and process lowered the cost of mass production and mass marketing standardized products. Now, before we start to get into the racism and the classism of the food industry and how a lot of American food industries are able to use their Western influence to go in, nationalize, colonize, imperialize other countries. You feel me? In the name of food. You know what I'm saying? Y'all remember when the Amazon had burned down? Remember we learned so much about how Burger King was investing in money to make it where we can get this vegan meat, you know what I'm saying? Super meat, you feel me? Impossible meat, you know what I'm saying? Like, we seen that there are a lot of Western companies that's always already had interest in keeping foreign entities unstable in the name of food. Shit crazy, man, crazy. The article I'm reading to y'all gives a new dimension to the exciting historical literature on marketing and consumer capitalism. It is the established in business history studies how intensive advertising, branding, and brand choice became major characterizations in the mass marketing of consumer goods from the 1870s to the 1920s. Recognizing that this is when the American government and the American corporations started to expand their empire on how they marketed their products to other people within the global community. So y'all can really grasp the concept on this dyes and shit. The use of dyes has been discussed tangentially in a number of literatures. Let's think about this, man. Historians of the chemical industry have explored the development of synthetic dyes in Europe and the United States. Few studies, however, have fully examined the history of the food dye business or the inter-industrial relations between the dye and food industries. The limited historical studies about food coloring have mainly focused on food additives in context in the early 20th century pure food movement and regulation. The reason why I think it's important to recognize the impact that food dye had on the industry is based off of how much information we now know about the red 40 dye and the other colored dyes that go into food that's been outlawed in a whole bunch of other countries and that literally has been shown, that studies have shown, leads to hypertension, hyperactivity, and attentiveness, and the list goes on. So when we think about how they really put food color in it to make it where it's more appealing, it really came at the expense of a lot of not only our physical health, but also our mental health. If you grew up like me, watching Saturday cartoons or watching Nickelodeon or Disney or Cartoon Network, there was no way for you to catch any one of them shows, Ed, Edd n Eddy, Powerpuff Girls, Hey Arnold, without you catching some junk food commercials where it was marketing to kids. And when you think about that specifically, about how your childhood can be illustrated by the plethora of commercials that was uniquely marketed towards you, You start to recognize how the way that we think about the law being able to sustain social order, it really ain't like that at all, because these folks will allow for these corporations to bamboozle and hoodwink kids. When you think about it, it's not that surprising that they was able to allow for the different loan industries to prey on 18-year-olds, because they allow for the junk food industries to prey on 10-year-olds and 8-year-olds. Let's get into it, man. The origins of commercial junk food, man. Commercial junk food fall into roughly 4 major categories. Research over me search, and giving y'all historical context. Did you know that the term junk food heard in the United States since the 1960s became a buzzword in the following decade when Michael Jacobson, one of the founders of the Center of Science and Public Interest, began using it frequently in his speeches and writings. The term junk food came to mean those foods or beverages with minimal proteins, vitamins, minerals, fiber, or other desirable nutrients, but high in calories, fat, salt, sugar, and in caffeine. Yes. Commercial junk food falls into roughly 4 major categories. Snack foods such as potato chips, candy, chocolate, and bakery goods. Carbonated and non-carbonated beverages such as Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, and Kool-Aid. And notice these names we saying, how they be synonymous with different countries. With different companies. And we have Kool-Aid, the sugary cereals such as Sugar Pops, Frosted Flakes, and fast foods such as hamburgers, shakes, hot dogs, and French fries. These 4 major categories within snack food has more impact on your livelihood and on what laws get passed in this country, and on how your tax dollars get used for spreading up democracy or fighting for freedom in other places. They got more impact on our shit than any one of them votes you can think of. And let me be clear, I'm not saying don't vote either. You know what I'm saying? I'm just being very straightforward in who has influence over the policy making process and who don't. You feel me? In their origins, these foods got some long ass histories. Peep game, snack foods, for instance, were around long before mass production made them an American exception. Snacks consumed in the home usually consisted of fruit, unsalted nuts, or bread and cheese. Outside the home, concessionaires and vendors sold salty snacks such as peanuts and popcorns on the streets of American cities and at the fairs, circuses, carnivals, and sporting events. In the late 19th century, though, commercial salty snacks such as pretzels and potato chips, hard candies such as lemon drops and lollipops, and chewy candies such as caramels and licorice began to be locally manufactured and sold in grocery stores, man. In the early 1890s, Cracker Jacks, I feel like anybody that grew up around their parents and their grandparents, especially if you grew up in the 90s, in the 2000s, your people had some Cracker Jacks, And as a matter of fact, Cracker Jacks, in my opinion, was damn near seen as like a middle class American staple. If you had, could afford Cracker Jacks, you probably had a little status, Or you had the means to be able to go buy you your little snack instead of making and preparing yourself, because that was obviously a little cheaper, man. In the late 1890s, Cracker Jacks, a salty, sweet combination of caramelized popcorn and peanuts, became America's first nationally promoted commercial snack food. Milton Hershey's mass-produced chocolate bars followed in the 1900s. Yes, that Hershey's too. Others began manufacturing cookies such as Oreos and Chips Ahoy, and bakery snacks such as Twinkies and Snowballs and ice cream. By the mid-20th century, tens of thousands of snack foods were commercially available, sold in grocery stores, vending machines, and street kiosks. When you think about how the way we outlaw drugs in this country usually has to deal with the general welfare of Americans' health, and when you think about how we've been able to standardize a lot of junk food within our lifestyles, you recognize that the state, the law, the government don't really give a damn about your health. They really care more about how to make you think they care about it while trying to mitigate as much profits off of your suffering as possible. My homeboy Stacy G, one of my best friends, he said this to me one time. He said that if we ate correctly, a lot of industries would die. As we go longer in this video, you will see that there are a lot of industries that are uniquely charged by the way we eat. And they say we are what we eat. And a lot of us eat shit. So are we full of shit? So let's get into these carbonated beverages, man. Flavored carbonated beverages such as ginger ale and root beer originated in drugstores where druggists concocted mixtures intended to resolve medical problem. See, the black community ain't all bad when we start talking about that ginger ale. And it's the reason why so many of us think it got healing powers, because, you know, the drugsters and druggists concocted mixtures that were supposed to help us resolve some of these medical problems. Locally, bottled soda was sold in confectionaries and general stores by the mid-19th century. The first mass-produced soda was root beer, which was promoted in 1876 by Philadelphia drugstore operators Charles E. Hires. Coca-Cola came along in 1886, 10 years later, followed by Pepsi-Cola, 1898. Thousands of other soft drinks were manufactured during the late 19th centuries, and most contained sugar and caffeine. Here's a little fact. I used to eat noodles a lot. I used to eat ramen noodles a lot, and because I grew up around people that was in the prison industrial complex throughout my life, I know how to make a jailhouse spread before I knew how to do my timetables. You feel me? And what a jailhouse spread really is a whole bunch of foods you dump into some noodles to try to make the noodles spread so you can get full, and it really just be a whole bunch of more bullshit. You feel me? A whole bunch of more junk food and high food with high sodium, you feel me? And high calories. You threw into some food with high salary and high calories, and now you just got a full concoction of salt and sugar and calories and shit you don't need. You know what I'm saying? And it's not coincidental that a lot of these junk food industries love to promote and advertise to particular communities. Quaker Oats was the first food company to roll out a national advertising campaign. They trademarked name and image of benevolent Quaker were instantly recognizable on packages of oats, and the company mounted advertising signs on train cars. Quaker Oats also introduced the redeemable premium coupon, which was packed in the box. The National Biscuit Company followed the Quaker model, which the national promotion of the Unita biscuits in 1898. Similar tactics would be employed by the food snack manufacturers, beginning with Cracker Jack. The name Cracker Jack was trademarked early in 1896, and almost immediately the manufacturer launched promotional campaigns in Chicago, New York, and Philadelphia. Ads placed in local newspapers introduced Cracker Jack as the 1896 sensation, a new confection, not yet 6 months old, which had made the most instantaneous success of anything ever introduced. The accompanying slogan ran, "The more you eat, the more you want." Later advertisements touted Cracker Jack as a healthful, nutrition food concoction, the standard popcorn confection by which all were judged. And this right here, when you start getting into how from the very beginning, companies have always been able to get away with bamboozling and mislabeling their food, trying to get consumers to believe that if you eat my shit, you're gonna be being healthy, when in actuality, it's the contrary. Eating your shit gonna make us unhealthy. The intersections of food and racism. Food and racism, man.
It's as American as apple pie.
Go together like bacon and eggs. I don't even eat swine. Before we get into food and racism, it's important that I give you some technical context about racism to make this video make sense, man. In the 19th century, invention of racism as a biological construct encouraged the manifestation of white supremacy and white privilege. The ascension of a science-based model, white supremacy became both the defense of and incentive for European colonization. As revolutions in France and America coincided with new slave-based economies in the West, race as a biological construct arose as a rationalization and justification for human slavery at the time, when Western European societies were embracing philosophies promoting individual and human rights like liberty, democracy, justice, brotherhood, and equality. Along with the idea of imminent white supremacy came the power to exploit non-white cultures for the benefit of white people. Both food and food production, from agriculture to cooking, were among the first instances of cultural appropriation, as white imperialism sought to profit from the exploited labor of non-white cultures. And this is where we start to analyze not only how different food industries market towards black people and poor people of color, but also start thinking about the correlation between income levels and diet level, and recognizing how when black people make a food, like say macaroni and cheese, it becomes seen as a American staple when white folks start loving it. But when black folks is just doing it, it's seen as just being unhealthy, or it's just seen as being like soul food or Negro food. And what we see is that the cultural appropriation on which group or which demographic gets profit and credit for creating the food is also a part of how wealth gets distributed and how wealth, gets identified and knowledge. When I first started learning about urban development, one of the first things they bring to your attention is how within certain neighborhoods it's more likely for you to be able to find a McDonald's or a convenience store, and that's how you get your nutrients, than you being able to find a grocery store that actually sells produce. With that being said, we're gonna introduce the word of food apartheid. I know usually you're used to hearing the concept of a food desert, but deserts naturally occur. Food apartheid shows that it's intentionally done by people to people, and that's the reason why we're going to up our vocabulary and language and being able to define the phenomenon and make it act in a desired manner. When we talk about food apartheid, we must acknowledge that there are legislation and policies in place that make it more conducive for these food apartheids and food swamps to occur in more black, poor areas than the white ones. And this is all a part of the intelligent design of the American food industry. For context, a food desert is defined as an area that has limited access to food that is plentiful, affordable, and nutritious. Food deserts are attributed to food apartheid and have root causes in food insecurity, racial segregation, and proximity to supermarkets, access to vehicles, and you being able to just access food in itself. When we talk about the way that different areas are structured, we have to think about how not only the air quality in those areas are structured, but also how their access to food is. And what we know is that internationally speaking as well, there are companies that will sell, Europeans this type of baby formula, but then sell the Africans this type of baby formula. Roll the clip.
Nestle, the world's largest consumer goods company, has been accused of deliberately adding sugar to infant milk and cereal products sold in many developing countries in Africa and across the globe. This practice is a direct violation of international norms.
The social, cultural, and economic value of food often reflects the value that society places on a particular culture or group of people. Food discourse reflects these values and frequently perpetuate racist, exploitive, and oppressive stereotypes. Cultural appropriation occurs when a dominant group seeks to use and profit by knowledge of the dominant or marginalized group in the United States. This occurs, for example, when white chefs set as discoverers, educators of ethnic and non-white cuisines. Racist food discourse also occurs in food marketing as stereotypical images are used to sell food products, thereby perpetuating racist tropes and normalizing racial power structures. The language used to describe racist food discourse is lacking as it focuses on the historical understanding of race, namely blatant acts of bigotry and discrimination. In order to understand how and why racism is allowed to perpetuated through food discourse, it is essential to create and redefine the language we use to discuss it. One time, me and my wife watched this movie on Netflix about Forrest Whitaker being in this South American country and how there were American corporations that was trying to nationalize the food and nationalize their water, I believe, and how they were literally hiring like fire squads to kill the native people. Recently, there was a big court decision that came down that reflect this movie. The reason why I'm bringing this up right now is because we have to have a conversation about how American food industries are able to employ militaries to wage war on foreign populations. I also watched this movie about avocados and about how the avocado industry was single-handedly started in California and how the toll that growing avocados has on agriculture makes it where it starts to kill water sources. And what we've seen is that because the big avocado companies was doing their thing in California so much, it led to water shortages, and then those companies and that industry kind of moved down south. When we learn about how Mexico and different countries in South America have been impacted by avocados, it is mind-blowing to show the capacity that these companies have on the livelihoods of people just out of the name of food. And the reason why I keep on saying this for food, because sometimes we only view food in terms of economics and in terms of profit, and we don't view food as a right. You feel me? As a moral, ethical thing that all humans should have. And I think that's the reason why there's so much bloodshed, exploitation, racism, and fat phobia around food. Who gets to have food? Who gets to determine the value of the food? Who gets to determine what goes in the food? You know what I'm saying? And that's the reason why Supreme Court deciding that, we no longer had to have these expert agencies to make sure that we're making a good decision. So the FDA, even though they could do a way better job in their history, them not being able to have the ability to say, hey, this is too much lead in your food. That should make all Americans a little bit alarmed, especially when we say that we have the land of the free and the home of the brave, and we recognize that our government is supposed to be always looking out for our livelihood, our general welfare, and then they knowingly feed us shit that give us cancer. The pistachios, and recognizing how Zionist lobbyists were able to impact the pistachio industry, shows that big food money is like Big Pharma, man. They got more impact on legislation getting passed or not getting passed than they should. And I would like to admit they have. When I learned that we don't necessarily need dairy, and you recognize how much the dairy industry lobbied to make it where they uniquely marketed towards kids and say we need it for our bone health, it fucked me up. Yeah, it did. Do y'all know about Nestle? Like Nestle chocolate, Nestle water? Let's learn about them. Roll the clip.
Hey, Nestle! Wait, we already did this. Why are you back?
Oh, you thought that was it? Dude, we could film a documentary about Nestle documentaries.
What are you up to now?
Oh, we were just thinking, like, what if we owned all the water?
No, you may not own all the water. Isn't your CEO the one that said water isn't a human right?
Oh, that was totally taken out of context. Just watch the whole interview.
Okay, so you're not going to try to own all the water?
But we definitely are. He just didn't say it out loud.
You're not targeting, like, super vulnerable places, are you? And how are you getting this done?
We're just targeting drought-stricken California and Michigan, near Flint. And you should see how we're handling developing nations. It's going to be hard to develop without any water. And the way we do it is we target morally flexible politicians and then, lobby them.
Isn't lobbying just bribery with extra steps?
No, there's no extra steps. But don't worry, we sold off most of our water brands in 2021.
Okay, well, that's good.
Yeah, I'm sure the private equity firm that bought it is going to run it way differently than we did.
Do y'all know they're using all type of questionable chemicals to preserve our fruit? I was watching this video on Instagram, and it showed literally how different food manufacturers send our fruit or have our fruit going to other countries, and they putting like bug boo-boo on the fruit, pesticides and shit to make it where it keeps the color. And that's the reason why I start this video with how much the food industry puts significance on tricking consumers with the food color. They do it so much that to this day right now, they try to trick us when it comes to produce and making it where they add different shit to make it shiny. Roll the clip, man.
Grocery Manufacturers of America estimated that 10% of the commercially available food in the United States is adulterated. That's 1 in 10. It means if you're not on that 8-item or less checkout line, you've got something in your cart when you leave the supermarket that's probably bogus. Doesn't really matter whether it's legal or illegal. It's where you're being tricked. You're buying something that's not what you think it is.
False advertisement, false advertisement. When I was growing up, I really thought that false advertisement was against the law. And then I learned it was more like a moral thing. With that being said, do y'all know that the FDA allows for different food companies to purposely mislabel and mislead consumers? Recently, I started being more conscious of what I eat because I was gaining some weight. You know what I'm saying? I usually be at like 170, 180. I got to them at like 200. I'm like 190 something right now, like 196, 197, man. I started working out. And for me working out and paying more attention to what I'm eating, because all these apps love to suck up in our data, because I started searching about, calorie deficits and, what's high in protein and what type of sugar I stay away from, these apps started sending me more content about food. And when I started seeing more content about food, I started learning more about how I should have been conscious about this the whole time, man. If we eat correctly, industries fail. We should start viewing the food industry more like we view drug dealers, because that's exactly what they're doing. They manufacturing drugs. They damn sure don't only be selling food. They be selling chemicals. Education is elevation. Research over me search. I hope this video is able to plant some type of seed to make you be more mindful of what you put in your body, because it definitely has an outcome of how long your body stay above ground. If they don't get you, I don't know what will.